From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Library of Congress and to this event, Saving Libraries During a Time of War. The Hill Museum and Manuscript Library's race to preserve manuscripts threatened by war and cultural trafficking. My name is Kenneth Nirati. I'm a reference specialist in the European Division. The library is pleased to sponsor today's event, and we do so in partnership with the Embassy of the Republic of Malta, the Embassy of Italy, the Italian Cultural Institute, and the European Union National Institutes for Culture. We are also pleased to have as our guest speaker Dr. Daniel K. Gullo, the Joseph F. McAuliffe Curator of the Malta Study Center. In just a minute, I will ask our specialist for both Italy and Malta, Ms. Lucia Wolf, to introduce the speaker. Before that, let me say that the Library of Congress is proud of its extensive collections on both Malta and Italy. If you have any questions about using these collections, be sure to contact Ms. Wolf. We hope you enjoyed Dr. Gullo's presentation and that you will come back to use our collections. I thank all who have made this event possible. Of course, I must ask you to please silence all cell phones and portable electronic devices. This presentation will be webcast, and there will be a question and answer period at the end. And by asking a question, you're giving the library permission to webcast your image and your voice. I now ask Ms. Wolf to the podium.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lucia Wolf. I am thrilled to have you here today for this event that touches upon a topic that is vital for the future of libraries and museums. Libraries are not static institutions. They shift with the transformations of society and cultural communities of which society is made. In spite of changes, libraries' missions and goals remain fundamentally unchanged. The preservation of cultural heritage for future generations and the promotion of new cultural venues. As the writer Italo Calvino poignantly said, libraries are systems in which the various eras organize the canonical as well as the apocryphal texts. Food for thought. Before introducing our speaker, I would like to acknowledge the presence of some guests. Well, he was going to be here, but I will just say it anyway. His Excellency, the Ambassador of the Republic of Malta, Pierre Clive Ajus. Hello. I'm still coming down. Hello there. Thank you very much. It's an honor to have you here. And Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your company and for the company of your diplomats from the embassy, Mr. Neville Mifsud and Mr. Peter Healy. I would also like to thank the Honorable Ambassador Peter Selfridge, maybe not yet here, Chief of Protocol at the U.S. Department of State. Thank you to Dr. Constance Whiteside for being here. Thank you very much. Dr. Constance Whiteside is the Senior Outreach Officer of the Delegation of the European Union to the United States. Thank you, my friend Renato Miracco, the Cultural Attaché of the Embassy of Italy in Washington, D.C. I would like to ask the Ambassador at the end of the Q&A if you would like to make the conclusions. And Renato wants to say a few words after the Ambassador, maybe also about the program, Okay, finally, I need to acknowledge Dr. John Van Oudenaren, the Director for Scholarly and Educational Programs of the Library of Congress's National and International Outreach Office, whose support was essential for holding this event in this beautiful venue. Thank you. Incidentally, I would like to bring your attention to a small display that I have tried to curate a little bit in a hurry because I like researching the collections very widely and I get lost in the research. But back there we have some rare books, some maps, Ambassador, and everyone else. You're welcome to go in at the end of the lecture and take a look. The items out there are about Malta or published in Malta and in different languages. So now I will introduce Dr. Gullo. Dr. Daniel Gullo is the Assistant Director of the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library and the Joseph S. McAuliffe Curator of the Malta Study Center. Dr. Gullo currently holds the position that I have just described, the McAuliffe Curator of the Malta Study Center at the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. He received his bachelor's degree from Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in History and Spanish, a Master's of Arts from the University of Toronto in Medieval Studies. We have something in common there. And a Master's in Arts and Theology from St. John's University in Collegeville, and his PhD from the University of Chicago in History. He has held the position of lecturer in medieval history at Northeastern Illinois University and assistant professor in history and geography at Columbus State University. His specialty is the history of monasticism and book culture in late medieval and early modern Europe. I'm sorry, I'm reading, a bit agitated, with a particular interest in the history of religious orders in the Kingdom of Aragon during the 15th and 16th centuries. Dr. Gullo, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming on this exceptionally wonderful day here in Washington, D.C. I've been coming to D.C. now regularly for the last couple of years and staying in many different neighborhoods across the city, and I can tell you that I become more enamored with Washington as time goes by. And I want to thank Ambassador Ajus of the Republic of Malta and in her absence, Dr. Patricia Borge, for providing me with the opportunity to represent their wonderful country. This is our third partnership over the last 2 years, and I hope we can continue working together for many years to come. I would also like to briefly express my sincere thanks to Ambassador Armando Varaccio and the Embassy of Italy, the Italian Cultural Institute, the European Union National Institutes for Culture, and the Library of Congress for organizing and sponsoring this important series on the need to preserve culture and libraries during times of war and conflict. Now, my discussion today will center on the history and activities of the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library and its 50 years to preserve culture across the world, to first microfilm and then digitize endangered library collections. The Malta Study Center, as part of HMML, has contributed to this effort for 43 of the 50 years of its existence, and to my knowledge, remains the longest self-sustained continuing effort to photographically preserve manuscript culture in the world today. I will discuss the historical legacy of HMML and how it emerged in response to the destruction of libraries, particularly medieval manuscripts in World War II, and then quickly turned to our current preservation efforts, which will include not only some of the older microfilm history, but also our current digital photography. I will also end with a brief display of our new digital collection, which we have recently released online in August, Virtual HMML, which will be sharing our preservations with the world. I hope to leave plenty of time for discussion, because I think in many instances a discussion of HMML is best done with your questions, and there are many questions that can arise from the preservation of libraries. If I might indulge a little brief personal history, I'd like to place the context of HMML's organizational efforts within Benedictine history, and in particular Benedictine monasticism in Europe, so that we can understand how St. John's Abbey in central Minnesota became the leading pioneer of microfilm and digitization of endangered library collections in the world. My first story, and I will limit it to two brief stories, begins with my own research on the Benedictine monastery of Santa Maria de Montserrat in Catalunya, and the efforts of two 18th century historians, one a Jesuit, Raimundo Diosdado Caballero, who was living in Rome, and the other, the Augustinian Francisco Mendez, living in Madrid, who were attempting to uncover the early printing history of Spain of the 15th century as they engaged in a historical debate at the close of the 18th. They were particularly interested in the printing press at Santa Maria de Montserrat, operated by Johann Leuschner between 1499 and 1500. Montserrat not only boasted of one of the finest medieval manuscript collections in Europe of the time, but also one of the best rare book collections. It was also one of the most important early prolific centers of printing at the end of the 15th century. Now, being good historians, both of them, unable to travel, wrote to the archivist at Montserrat. They contacted Fray Benet Ribas y Calaf, who was asked to provide them any type of information he could from their manuscripts and archives regarding the printing press. Fray Benet, who was an exceptional historian himself, dug deep into the manuscript archive and actually found the original contracts that were written by Garcia Jimenez de Cisneros, the abbot at the time, and Johann Leuschner, the printer who had taken his press to the abbey. He found those documents, and he first transcribed and sent them to Diosdado Caballero in Rome, and later again to Madrid, to Francisco Mendez. Those two historians in turn printed selections of those letters, Mattingly in different versions, in their own respective books. The fact that both historians recorded distinct original transcriptions of a copy of original documents, provided me as a young scholar with this amazing opportunity if I could only find those original manuscripts. My dissertation would have been complete in much less time than it was. Sadly, however, Montserrat's library was destroyed. Between 1808 and 1812, major battles took place during the Peninsular War, and Napoleonic troops burnt the library to the ground in 1812. And as a result, over 10,000 manuscripts and early printed books went up in flames, and countless manuscript archival records no longer exist and were destroyed. Everything that we know about the printing press of Johann Leuschner and its operations, all of the manuscripts recorded those activities, are now only preserved in copies found in 18th century books. The second Benedictine one is probably more famous to you. These very famous pictures, of course, of the destruction of Monte Cassino from 1944. It was at this time, of course, that something really remarkable was happening. Libraries, of course, in Europe during world wars had been vulnerable to destruction. One only has to remember what happened to the University Library in Louvain, which was destroyed in World War I. But here there was an interesting debate that took place in 1944 when two German officers showed up at the abbey and basically begged the monks to relocate their library in order to preserve it because of the threat of Allied bombing raids. The Maltese archivist and librarian at the time, Father Mauro Iguanas, who was born in the city of Sengleia, argued that the library should not be moved. In fact, he was very worried because of the rumors that the Germans had been confiscating libraries and deporting them to Germany, never to return again. His confrere at the time, Tommaso Lecciotti, argued on the contrary and said that we must move them, that he wasn't really confident in Allied bombing, particularly because of the evidence of what had taken place in the southern Italian peninsula at the time. Fortunately for us, the group got together, the monks in their chapter, and they voted to move the library to San Paolo fuori Muro in 1944. And as a result, the state and monastic library that was housed at Monte Cassino was preserved. Father Mato Iguanez was, of course, extremely happy about the preservation of the library and the stroke of luck that he had. In fact, we singularly owe him the existence of the ashes of Keats and Shelley, which he had put into his own duffel bag and hidden in a secret part of the library, and then transported them to the British Embassy after the war. This is a fun little story to add. The destruction of the library, as we can see here, of course, was a great tragedy, although the books were preserved. And Father Mato Iguanez left to the United States to raise funds for the construction of a new library, and then went to Malta in 1948, where he became the chief librarian of the Royal Library of Malta until his death in 1955, a point which I will return to in a few minutes. It is actually a result of the destruction of Monte Cassino and its effect upon Benedictines throughout the world that we can probably trace the history of the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, which was the result of a conversation which took place in Rome in Italy, probably in the late 1950s, early 1960s, between Father Barry Colum and the Pontiff. And it was at this time that it was decided that Father Coleman Barry would actually try to engage in the process of microfilming all of the Benedictine manuscript libraries in Europe. Now, it is not as if these type of projects were unheard of. We already had the Knights of Columbus working on microfilming the Vatican Library, and the Lutheran Churches of America had begun filming the works of Martin Luther and the early Protestants in Germany and Austria. But there was no organization that had dedicated itself to the preservation of small and remote libraries that were vulnerable not only to the fact that the libraries might close, but also to the fact that these libraries were often neglected for conservation purposes. Father Coleman at this time enlisted to help with this endeavor, his confrere Oliver Kapsner, who was at this time a librarian at Catholic University of America and also a research librarian at the Library of Congress. Father Oliver Kapsner had firsthand witnessed the destruction of Europe, having been a chaplain in World War II in the European Theater of Operations. I believe he was at the Battle of Bulge, and therefore could see firsthand some of the greatest destruction of European culture that took place during that campaign. These two gentlemen, of course, first went to Italy. It was the logical place for them to begin their preservation efforts. But initially their work was frustrated, and Monte Cassino did not open their doors to their preservation. Instead, they went to Austria and later to Germany. Austria was an obvious place to go. Not only did it have some of the greatest and most beautiful Benedictine libraries in the world, but at this time it was sandwiched between both the Warsaw Pact and NATO. Austria was vulnerable through invasion because it wouldn't immediately trigger the NATO alliance. We have to remember this was, of course, taking place in 1964 and 1965 at the height of the Cold War. And it was at this time in 1965 when the abbot of Kremsmünster Abbey opened his doors to the Hill to Father Kapsner and began the microfilm project, which has now been going strong for over 50 years, now that we are using digital technology. This early work that was undertaken by Father Oliver Kapsner in Austria and Germany lasted until the early 1970s. And it was at this time that the then director, Dr. Julian Plant, envisioned HMML's work into something much bigger. What began as the monastic manuscript microfilm project quickly became the Hill Monastic Manuscript Library. And it was at this time, in discussions first with Ethiopia, with Emperor Haile Selassie, and then in Spain, and then, of course, with Malta, that the Hill Museum began a worldwide effort to preserve endangered library collections. The first one, of course, that expanded beyond Europe was actually in Ethiopia. His Holiness Abuna Theophilus and Emperor Haile Selassie were very worried about the state of Ethiopian libraries, in particular in the cultural trafficking of objects. They were also worried about an uprising and some form of communist revolution in Ethiopia, and therefore saw it as imperative to start preserving their libraries before it was too late. It must be remembered that in 1973, Spain, of course, was still dealing with the idea of what might happen if Franco had passed away. Given the complexity and violence of the Spanish Civil War, destruction of the Spanish cultural heritage was an obvious peril. Malta, of course, in 1973 was going through its own transition. It was strategically located in the Mediterranean, and with the conflicts going on in the world, one might not know what would happen if it became an object of conflict as a competition between the Warsaw states and also NATO. To kind of put this into perspective, you can imagine what was going through the people's minds at HMML in the early 1970s. The University of Complutense in Madrid between 1936 and 1939 lost 80,000 books. 80,000 in one single institution. Malta itself received more bombs between 1940 and 1943 in a geographical area than any other place in Europe. What might happen to those library collections if war began again? To kind of put all of this into perspective, I'm going to focus on a few unique objects, which, thanks to the efforts of HMML, we now can actually trace. One of them was a microfilm of this 18th century Bible. It's actually not a complete Bible, but selections, photographed in the 1970s, known as EMML 7014. This Bible disappeared, only to resurface several years later at the National Library in Norway. And thanks to our microfilming process, you can see I've actually flipped into the modern era already. Thanks to our microfilming process, we are actually able to identify and locate this Bible and create a strong connection between its original owners in Ethiopia and also maintain its place in the National Library of Norway. Therefore, what began as a project to preserve cultural heritage helped us actually locate illegally trafficked manuscripts. This is something that continues to today. One can only turn to eBay and see the cultural heritage from around the world: Ethiopia, Syria, Egypt, the Middle East, Afghanistan. The market for manuscripts is ever increasing, and because of their uniqueness, they are objects of desire on the market. A second example, which I find even more interesting to my mind, is this really unique cover that you can see from our 2010 newsletter, Illuminations. You can see here an 11th century Latin Bible that was produced in Spain. It's remarkable because this Bible was actually destroyed in the Complutense Library in 1937. What you see in color is the one fragment that remains from this very rare Visigothic manuscript. In 2010, Dr. Hugh Houghton contacted HMML and wondered, did we have a microfilm of this manuscript? Which seemed a bit odd because we hadn't actually done any work in the 1930s, but he wondered if somehow or another there was anything that we had. There was some plates floating around, but he really wanted to know, was there something? And in fact, what ended up happening is in 1979, unbeknownst to all of us, Dr. Julian Plant had engaged in this process of buying individual microfilms to support HMML's overall collections, trying to find copies of all of the Codices Latini Antiquiores so that people could study the manuscripts and not just the plates at HMML. In so doing, he actually purchased a film from the Biblioteca Nacional in Madrid in 1979, which was Codex 31 from the Biblioteca Complutense, which was taken before the Spanish Civil War and housed in the National Library. The National Library of Madrid, or the National Library of Spain, sent us their one and unique copy instead of making a duplicate. So we had the only microfilm of the world of this lost manuscript, which was now being able to be studied and put together with the original. My third and final example, which I can smile at my colleague Dr. Karen Ruff over there to the left, is actually now found in Malta. This, of course, is a digital manuscript which we photographed earlier this year. This manuscript was discovered in a drawer upstairs and found within a collection of manuscript fragments donated to the Cathedral Archives by the family of Fray Mato Inguanez, who, remember, was the library and archivist of Monte Cassino. This very rare 11th or 12th century manuscript includes within it a unique blend of Beneventan and Carolingian paleography. And it is, to my mind, probably no doubt made, provisionally at least, provisionally made at the Scriptorium of Monte Cassino and brought to Malta by Father Iguañez after he went to the island in 1948, probably as part of maintaining and preserving some link to his abbey after he left and went to the National Library of Malta. From these extremely humble beginnings, we can actually think about 50 years of preserving the patrimony of humanity. On over 4 continents now, the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library has been preserving collections throughout the world. Today, we are working on 4 distinct continents, and what I would like to take a moment is to speak about our cultural efforts, first looking at those in the Middle East, then in Africa, but also in Malta, because all together they encompass our effort to preserve endangered collections. You can see we've just added one in Washington, D.C. in the upper left-hand corner, thanks to the Catholic University of America, who last week opened their collection to us to help preserve the Order of Malta's collection at their library, a very beautiful and wonderful collection. I'm going to begin with a brief discussion of our preservation efforts in Syria, which began in 2004 with an inheritance of a project begun by Brigham Young University. Our work in these libraries went from 2004 to 2012, focusing largely on the collections and homes in Aleppo, but also other few smaller collections in the country. These projects, of course, have been suspended. But in addition to our work there, several of these collections, at least we believe, might have been relocated. We simply do not know at this time. But what we do know is that we have preserved nearly 3,000 manuscripts which may or may not have been destroyed from the city of Aleppo, the surrounding villages, and homes. All of these collections are now being kept digitally at HMML and remain an important cultural repository for the work not only done by the librarians at the time, but by the continuing efforts of our catalogers throughout the world. A second collection, of course, is that in Iraq. We began filming in Iraq in 2003, and filming and digitization continues to take place primarily in the city of Erbil. Our preservation efforts began in Mosul and in Qaraqosh, 2 cities which, of course, are now remain under occupation by the Islamic State. We did work in other cities in Iraq and also in Baghdad, but primarily our effort is focused on the Christian communities which have been located in their endangered collections in northwestern Iraq in the province of Nineveh. This effort has largely been carried out by Father Najib, who is a Dominican, who is continuing work in Erbil. He's a rather remarkable man because he spends his mornings taking care of the refugees who are living in Erbil, and his afternoons and evenings, as you can see here, preparing these extremely beautiful manuscripts for digitization. This project is being done in concert with the Centre Numérique des Manuscrits Orientaux, the CNMO project. And as I will show you in just a few moments, it has done some of the most remarkable digitization in both Turkey and in Iraq over the last decade. A third major project, our largest project, is taking place currently in Mali, in the city of Bamako. That is because in 2012 there was the Tuareg rebellion which invaded the city. Many of you might be familiar with the recently published book, The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu, which recounts the efforts of the local population and librarians to transport over 50,000, some even say up to 300,000 manuscripts from Timbuktu to Bamako in order to preserve those manuscripts. Now, the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library has been working with several organizations in Mali and in Bamako. And here you can see the wonderful chests that they were created to ship these manuscripts to the capital. We have now 12 cameras operating in the city, funded by a variety of different organizations, including the Arcadia Fund, the Prince Claus Fund, the Juma al-Majid Center of Culture and Heritage, all working with Savama DCI to preserve these manuscript collections. We are, of course, working in Malta, and I know Malta, of course, is not currently underneath any formal threat of war or invasion, but it still suffers from the tremendous effects of World War II upon the island. And here I am speaking of the Notarial Archives in St. Christopher Street in Valletta, and the remarkable effort being led by Dr. Joan Abella and the Notarial Research Council to basically help restore literally thousands and thousands and thousands of manuscripts dating back to the 15th century in Malta, which were buried underneath the city and forgotten as a part of their attempt to preserve those records during the bombing raids of Valletta in World War II. The Hill Museum and Manuscript Library pioneered a project with the Notarial Archives between 2010 and 2014. And the register, which you see here, Register 202, which is a 16th century notarial document, has shrapnel holes in it made by a 200-pound bomb dropped by Stuka on top of Valletta in 1943. So you can actually see those are the bomb fragments that helped damage the manuscript. Thankfully, the European Union and the European Council have recently rewarded the Notarial Archives with a significant grant to not only help preserve these manuscripts, but to catalog them and make them available to the public. Another major collection in Malta, which was discovered in 2010, which was part of our work with the National Archives of Malta between 2007 and 2015, were an important collection of documents located in Fort Sant'Elmo at the front of Valletta. Here, in a cistern in 2010, literally probably somewhere around 10,000 to 15,000 manuscript documents were found at the bottom of a cistern where they were dumped or put in order to protect the documents during the bombing raids of World War II. As you can see, here's a beautiful 40-millimeter Bofors, which was located about 50 meters away from where these documents were found, obviously a target for any German bomber at the time. These manuscripts were discovered in 2010 and were in such a state that the army, the Maltese army, needed to be brought in using chemical suits to remove the documents from the cistern, and through the efforts of the National Archives were able to be cleaned and preserved, and the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library and Malta Study Center helped catalog and digitize these records in the fall of 2015. Currently in Malta, we are working with a project at the Fondazione Patrimonio Malti to help preserve private libraries. Private libraries are extremely vulnerable, not simply to forms of war, but in particular to sale, disbursement, or through issues of climate control. We will be engaging over the next 3 to 5 years in the digitization and preservation of these vast collections of libraries, primarily in the repositories of noble families. We're currently working at the Casa Rocco Piccola in Valletta, where we have found over 400 manuscripts and 300 archival boxes with manuscripts dating from the early 15th century through the 20th century. These collections are not simply Maltese collections, but European collections, as the family, the de Pirot family, held important positions in France, Italy, and in the Mediterranean as naval captains. And they chart the history of the Mediterranean. One of the most amazing documents that we were able to find was this beautiful collection of Lebanese documents that were suing the Knights of Malta in the 1730s to have their cargo restored to them after it had been illegally seized in their minds by Maltese corsairs. The de Pirot family, being quite wise, bought the legal suit from the Lebanese family and proceeded to win the case in court. Some 30,000 scudi were delivered to the Pirot as part of the process. This is actually an image as a part of the legal proceedings where they're trying to chart the Maltese ships hitting and are about to capture that poor Lebanese sailing vessel. Before I move on, I want to say that all of this done, all of the work we've done, should be reminded that every library that we worked in, whether it was vulnerable to war or not, remains vulnerable. We did microfilm the Cologne State Archives back in the 1980s. And as a great tragedy, I believe according to a gas leak, the Cologne State Archives collapsed in 2009. And thanks to our microfilming efforts, we preserved the medieval collection, which by and large was destroyed during the collapse of the building. What does this all mean? It means a significant amount for the preserver of culture of our patrimony of humanity. Results from our work in Iraq and Syria alone, we have preserved 10 collections of nearly 2,000 manuscripts in Mosul, 846 manuscripts in Baghdad. In Aleppo itself, nearly 3,000 manuscripts. Between Iraq and Syria, 8,000 manuscripts have been digitally preserved that have been vulnerable to war. If we put that into the larger context of the Middle East, if we add Lebanon and Jerusalem, Turkey, and Egypt, nearly 21,000 manuscripts dating back to the Middle Ages have been preserved by HMML. If we think about this in perspective of what this means as a repository of humanity, and I'm sitting here in probably the world's greatest repository of knowledge that there is, we have 36,600 digitized manuscripts from the Middle East, which is larger than all of Western libraries combined in Europe and North America. If you think about the Syriac collection alone, 13,500 manuscripts are now being preserved and cataloged at HMML, where all of the European libraries and North American libraries preserve only 3,400 within their repositories. For Islamic culture, the numbers are no less remarkable. 31,992 manuscripts and growing. We think we'll have nearly 100,000 manuscripts preserved in the next 5 years alone. It will be the largest collection of Islamic manuscripts in the world. Malta is a significant contributor to this project. We've been working in Malta since 1973, and as I say, uninterruptedly. If we think about the cathedral itself, which was largely microfilmed, 15,000 manuscripts charting the history of Malta through the 15th century, through the 20th century, in the parish archives have been preserved by HMML. This is extremely important because the Maltese population dispersed after World War II, largely as a result of the poverty of the country as it suffered from the effects of the war. I receive daily letters from Maltese from Australia, through Canada, through South America, all looking to us for their parish records in order to trace their family history. The National Library of Malta, nearly 3,500 manuscripts. And you can see from the digital collection, we now have 3,000 manuscripts themselves. This, of course, is a bit deceiving because we're largely preserving archival documents, and archival documents are much larger than a traditional manuscript. So if we can think of nearly 21,000 manuscripts, it's probably closer to 42,000 manuscripts preserved of Maltese cultural heritage. It's the largest repository of Maltese culture outside of the island in the world. To this, I can add nearly 90 documents that we preserved at the Catholic University of America last week. So how does this all play out in our world today? If this is the mission of HMML, to make sure that we preserve all of the culture that we have in the world, regardless of creed, regardless of place, regardless of society, these very, very valuable manuscripts. The Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, of course, is located in central Minnesota, which is a wonderfully safe place to be in the northern part of the United States. If you wish to come visit us, it is one of the most beautiful locations also. St. John's University and St. John's Abbey is great in the summer. Maybe February is a little more difficult, but the summer it is actually one of the most beautiful places to be. Our library is newly renovated. It is a state-of-the-art research facility. We hold guest quarters at the Abbey Guest House. People can come and stay and apply for fellowships to reward their research. We have nearly 50,000 reference books dedicated solely to the research of manuscripts, one of the largest research reference libraries in North America. We are a library of libraries. If you want to think about our digital collections alone, it's nearly 200 terabytes of digital data. For those librarians in this room, they understand what this means. This is a significant collection which has to constantly be updated and preserved. 50 million images and counting. Malta is about, I would think at this point, it's about 10 million of those 50 million manuscripts. It's a significant portion of the collection. 135,000 microfilm manuscripts are currently housed in our condition and in our vaults. We tape everything on our local drives. We have local tape. We back that on a second server. And then we have a third location, believe it or not, located in Utah, in a secret underground granite vault where we keep all of our digitized collections. I believe, I think, this is, not to quote me exactly on this, it can withstand a 50 megaton nuclear bomb. So the world's manuscript culture is well preserved. It's just outside of New York, Salt Lake City. I'm being from New York and thinking about that. I shouldn't, because I grew up in Utah. It's just outside of Salt Lake City, and it's near where the Church of Latter-day Saints, of course, keeps its genealogical records. All of this, of course, is great, but how do we actually make this available to the public? I'm very happy and very pleased to announce that as of August of this year, 2 years of efforts have been finalized where we can now start sharing all of these collections with you. This is a free online site, and it will become the largest repository, if not the largest repository, of manuscripts in the world. As of this morning, I think I looked, we have 5,576 fully digitized manuscripts located in our virtual HMML. If you think about this over the course of time, if we are able to complete our projects, if we just stop the projects that we are doing today with Timbuktu and every other manuscript, this will be over 100,000 digitized manuscripts located in virtual HMML. I want to give a shout out here to the Library of Congress and VIAF because of their work that dates back almost 200 years now, over 200 years. In establishing authorities, because one of the greatest things that's happening for our collections today is we are now instituting both VIAF and LC authority control over our collections. If you take a moment real quick, I'm going to pop out of my presentation and if I can put this up. This is the live site of Virtual Himmel, and I'm currently logged in. I'm going to just make it just a little bit smaller. That's too small. A little bit bigger on the screen for you to see. We can go ahead and just take a quick look at Reading Room where we do our search. This is a very simple interface. It works on an Elasticsearch, and you can do very simple things with this. And here I'm just going to narrow our search to digital collections and type in the word Syria. And you can see a fully detailed view of all of our Syria collections. We only have 237 records in it, but we'll be adding records over the course of time. If I open up the record, you can see here on the left, loading the image here. There's actually an early, I love this one because it shows you an early manuscript image taken in microfilm so that we can compare what the manuscript looked like when it was microfilmed over 50 years ago to the digital copy that was taken less than a decade ago. LC and VIAF library controls, of course, are being put in on this level. And if we go to the full description, you can start seeing how we're moving it down into Armenian controls and language, both native script and in English. Our work here, of course, is so that scholars can see the manuscript and take a good look at the manuscript in their own home, doing as much research as possible. This very elaborate system, which was put together by the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, funded by the Mellon Foundation and the Luce Foundation and money from the Arcadia Grant, is being put in place so that we can realize the idea that access should not be limited to our own local site at HMML, but the recognition that our responsibility is to the people who open these collections to us, who might never be able to travel to the United States to see these. We're talking about millions of displaced peoples displaced into Europe, into Asia, within their own countries, who might never have access to their own collections again. This, of course, creates other issues like how do we provide these people with internet access itself. But in the least, this free and open access to these collections will provide a repository for them to see their culture as it is transferred to the world. It's not simply about an issue of opening this up for scholarship. I myself and my colleague Dr. Ruff have been working on Latin fragments that we've been finding in Syria, fragments that date back to the 11th century potentially. We found a Beneventan manuscript in Aleppo, believe it or not, of the Bible. It's a fragment from the Numbers, I believe. These fragments are really the patrimony of humanity, and not just for scholars, but for the people themselves. Because, if I may just speak a little bit extemporaneously here, most of the work that we are preserving are liturgical works and religious works that are used by the people in their churches today. The fact is that these are not simply repositories that we're going and helping save, but living, breathing libraries, most of the manuscripts coming from the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries. I kind of want to conclude with some of our kind of projects. We hope to continue our work over the next decade in a variety of different places. In Europe, we're opening up places in the Balkans, which of course was ravaged by war during the 1990s. Ukraine, of course, which is undergoing conflict, even though it's in a kind of a ceasefire today. In Malta, we'll be working with the University of Malta and Heritage Malta in the coming years, we hope. In the Middle East, we hope to start working again in Lebanon, in Syria, if things hopefully soon we can go back to the country, and also in Yemen, which is in a state of war today. Afghanistan and India have also opened their doors to us, and we are currently in discussions with them in order to work there. So our work is actually expanding, and it is an expansion that is happening largely due to the support of the public, for the Republic of Malta, and in particular, for my sake, with the National Archives and the National Library of Malta. They've been helping me personally over the last few years. It's been a wonderful project. I've been involved with it for 2 years now. This is actually my first public presentation on HMML as a whole, but I will go ahead and end my discussion now and take your questions. I have a gentleman in the back. Right. He's hidden in the...
In 651, the Parsees left Iran. Did they take any manuscripts with them in Cappadocia?
I'll be honest with you. I'm not really a specialist on what might have happened in Central Asia at that time and in the Middle East. I do know that there's a substantial collection of Persian manuscripts both in northern India, Afghanistan, Pakistan. These collections are spectacular. I believe the National Library in Kabul itself has the largest collection of Persian manuscripts in the world. I know that we're in discussions in India right now to work on them. Our previous work in India was in southern India with the Syriac communities that had migrated there previously. But to the extent and size of the Persian collections that are in northern India, I'm sorry, I don't have that knowledge with me now. I would be surprised if they were not substantial, however.
What kind of equipment do you bring with you on site?
It's actually rather remarkable, if I can smile at my colleague Lenore Rouse from Catholic University at the moment. It's a small 90-pound box. We basically use a 20-megapixel Canon digital camera and a camera stand and 2 strobe lights and a laptop computer and a bunch of handmade, handy-dandy, get-in, get-out materials which have been perfected by my colleague, Wayne Torborg. An entire studio itself, we can move in and set up in, what do we do, about an hour and a half? More or less an hour and a half. We can set up an entire studio. The studio itself costs, I believe, less than $6,000, depending on the quality of the camera that we use, which is the major expense. which are actually becoming more affordable as they improve in the technology. So it literally, it's a 3-foot by 2.5-foot box, weighs 90 pounds. We can set up a studio in an hour and a half. Takes about an hour to tear it down. And within, 10, 15 minutes of setting it up, we can be fully digitizing a collection. It's a remote self-contained studio. And it's a simple Canon EOS DSLR 20 megapixel camera. For very large manuscripts, I use a D810 Nikon, 36.3 megapixels. But that's it. It's that simple. I wish it was more complicated. I could get into details, but it really is that simple.
Are you systematically trying to go back and digitize everything that's been microfilmed as much as you can and capture the colors on board? Are you forging ahead with just digitizing things for which there is no existing?
Fortunately, the European Union has engaged in tremendous efforts to provide for its own color digitalization projects. One of the things that we've done with our new system is we have a direct link where we can link our older microfilm collections to the new collections in Europe. Himmel's primary mission is to work with endangered libraries and libraries which are vulnerable to climatic change, which is really one of the primary instances in Malta. Getting proper climate control in an island environment is extremely difficult. But the European libraries know. I mean, I work in Italy, and because of my work with the Order of the Knights of Malta, we do work with European collections, and of course in the Balkans, which we hope to open up this year. But no, we won't be going back and systematically doing those collections because they're doing it themselves, and we don't need to. The great projects of Europeana, for example, is a remarkable project where you can see these collections coming together, an archives portal, Europe. And we will be linking our older records to their records as a part of our project ourselves.
It looked like you suspended the operations in Syria in 2012. Are you doing anything with the refugee camps or any kind of fleeing documents in the country?
We, through HMML and St. John's Abbey and the community that supports HMML, have been providing assistance to the refugees in Iraq as part of our mission. It would be irresponsible for us to simply care about their libraries and not the peoples themselves. I mean, as much as it is important for me to be taking care of tradition, these are people who are living in these camps today. We certainly do what we can within our institution. One thing that should be stated here is that all of our projects are run by local people paid through HMML. Therefore, in the least, we're providing employment opportunities for them. We do not take our librarians and go to these facilities to do the work. We train them locally, we provide the equipment, and then we support those efforts as they continue. So yes, we do engage in it with the best to our efforts when we are able to do so. Mostly in Erbil is where our work is. There's one question. That's it's a big question, and I would like to take this question both with regard to Malta and the world as a whole. Let me talk about Malta first, and then the world, because it's just simply because it's a little bit more familiar to me. If you want to think about this, and I'm speaking here as a historian, Malta is in the Mediterranean, but it's also in an area where earthquakes are prone. I mean, an earthquake, and it's close to Mount Vesuvius, which could have some dramatic effect upon the island. And I have to think to myself, every time I go there, if I knew that I had 12 months to digitize something on this island, what do I do? You can make an argument that I could go to the Co-Cathedral in Valletta, where they have the most precious antiphanaries produced, these beautifully illuminated Italian and French antiphanaries for the Grand Masters. Or do I go to the National Archives and go to the Tribunal Armamentorum, which chronicle primarily the slave trade in Malta that took place during the regime of the Knights in Malta? And if I have 12 months, what do I do? Because on the one hand, if I preserve the great culture, we can talk about these great artistic achievements of European civilization. On the other hand, if I take a decision not to do the records that recorded the slave trade, we might not know that the slave trade had been there or how prolific it was. Or those people and families that were there who might be looking to those records to trace their ancestry after slavery was abolished in 1798. It's a very big question. It's not dissimilar to what confronts us as an institution when we think about what we may or may not be doing in the world today. One could easily argue that one could look at Latin America or the Philippines or any other place which may be vulnerable to other forms of culture. Violence, coups d'etats, we simply don't know. People, by and large, have attempted to approach us. We do have within our own mission statement to provide access to collections which we already have, meaning that the work that we're doing in the Middle East, this grand heritage of the Middle East, is part of the European heritage. And to think of them as not collaborating with each other is just simply a logical fallacy. All of the Greek, Syriac traditions, all of the Armenian traditions were in constant communication with what was being done in the Latin West. They were constantly in communication. My dissertation itself is about a translation of a Syriac writer, Isaac of Nineveh, whose works were translated from Syriac into Greek and then into Latin, brought into Spain, translated into Catalan. So, moving from all the way from Syria into Spain at the 15th century, where a hermit decides, hey, this would be great to read in Catalan. So to think about this as being, disassociated is a fundamental problem for us. We do have it within our mandate to try to stay within our kind of focus, building upon the grand richness of the collection, while at the same time we've never closed our doors to anybody, provided that it fits the mission and funding can be found to support the project. If anything, there's too much to do. Sure.
I'm truly humbled to be here and to see the work that you are doing. And in what a place. And this temple, which is the ultimate temple in the world, where the word on a piece of paper is treasured, it's filed, it's recorded. And listening to your presentation and looking at the slides, I could not avoid, but how poor we would be if all this is lost. We would not have records of our failures, of our mistakes, of our discoveries. We would lose much of humanity. We would lose our love. And at the same time, I thought to myself, I said, how much work is going on unnoticed? If you just think about Malta, the figures you mentioned, things which I myself did not know, and which you are preserving forever, please God. And I think there is a bit of responsibility in this for all of us, for these people who are protecting our past for our future. So I'm extremely grateful, and there's no other place to say these words than here. And I'm extremely proud and humbled to be here in the Library of Congress, of all places, in Washington, D.C. Dr. Mirko, this is thanks to you. You are the initiator. I am just as grateful. Lucia, Dr. Saulf, I can only tell you how much, and I'm very sorry I came late. I was, but I would not have missed this for my life, believe me. I learned a lot of things. I'm greatly grateful for this. The unique, of course, I have to mention you, Constance, because you embody the European culture here. So the Library of Congress itself and the Malta Study Center, of which we are extremely proud here in the USA. So once again, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. And you've taught me a lot this Friday afternoon, believe me. Thank you very much.
A few words means a few words, not a long speech, don't worry. I don't want you to stop to seeing the beautiful exhibition that Lucia set up here. And thank you, Dr. Gullo, really, really thank you. You opened a door. You know what I mean? I opened a door. And I know, I don't know if anybody from the Belgian embassy will be here, is here now, because they approached me, they would like just to explore another items about library, about preserving. And I know that the Embassy of Malta has another secrets in under the door, because next time we really have to approach the submarine archaeology. This is another items. It's really, really interesting. Do you know what? When Italy, with the Italian Cultural Institute and the embassy took the presidency of EMNIC, was my crazy idea, them and me, to do it a team instead of events. What doesn't make any sense? We have to do a team. And the team that came in my mind was protecting our heritage. And now this is the 22nd event that we dedicated in this year to this team. In each one, open door. Do you know what I mean? It's unbelievable. I will have, next Tuesday, I will have another exhibition in New York with Columbia University dedicated to protecting our heritage. And the UNESCO is with us. So we have only to shake, and we have only to do something. To do something, you know, it's incredible, because you mentioned before eBay. I was really in contact with a lawyer, attorney from eBay. You don't know how many people are really not protecting our heritage in our daily life. They used to buy eBay items after items. Them on them, the shame on them, absolutely, in our daily life. We have to find out what we can do in our daily life to protect our heritage. I'm doing, for example, next year I'm doing a project with a school, first grade, second grade, third grade in the United States, in Maryland, and I was asking to the boys and girls, what you would like to preserve in your life? So the idea of preserving is something that you have to put like a seed in their mind. And the first response was really unbelievable. I would like just to preserve my dad coming home. I would like to preserve the story of my grandma told me. I would like to preserve a smell, perfume, story, book, items. All of this is preserving. All of this is our duty, exactly as you said, for the next generation. So, took with you this. Think about, contact me, because, thank God, our team of protecting our heritage will last another 3 years. So, we have time to explore and to open door after door. Thank you to all of you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.